talk about your farming versus the pets, because some people say, oh, these weren't pets, they were in the meat business, they're in the farm. Let's talk about it.
Sure. Number one thing is a breeder's worth 7,500. So you would never eat a breeder. Why? Because it takes 3.5 years to get a breeder. So you've got a lot of time, money spent already into that bird. You only get 100 pounds of meat off an ostrich. So it wouldn't even make sense, feasible sense, to butcher a breeder. Number two, because you've got all that time invested, they get names. They live their lives till they breed up to 55 years of age. They live to 75 years of age. They said has been recorded. We were hoping we were going to be able to see that here, to how long in captivity that they would live in Canada. But unfortunately, we never got that choice. But regardless of that, as I say, I am proud to say I was a farmer at one time of these birds, and we were the leaders in Canada in trying to show that there was a viable industry, that you could break down the bird. And the idea of breaking down an entire bird was to show that you honored that animal. Now, when I've always said I'm not about killing animals, I'm not. Absolutely, to me, if you're a breeder, you're 100% were a pet. Now, in order to do farming and to show farming to be a viable industry, you have to send some to market. And that's just the unnecessary evil of farming, whether we like it or not. So what we would do is, and this is a very good differential to show the difference of a chick, like I said, grows a foot a month. At 12 months of age, they're about 200, 250 pounds of a bird. So they're ready for market at basically, you could take them at 12 months of age, but normally in the industry, they would butcher them at about 15 months of age. So you put in a little bit of time into these birds, but you don't name them, you don't have anything to do with them unless they're going to become breeders. So we would even buy some birds from people, and we would raise them. We would put a couple extra months on them to fatten them up, put them on our diet. Why? Because we were more interested in breaking down the entire bird. And we started to study the health attributes of the ostrich oil. And ostrich have fat pads, and in those pads, it's just pure fat, beautiful fat pads. Now, we had realized that, and I realized at first, butchering a bird had broken its leg on Eric's parents' farm. So, to honor the animal, also, you just don't go bury it, you utilize that animal. And so I was like, wow, my hands are so soft. The fat on this bird is just amazing. And then I had asked Eric's grandma, hey, you render oil and there's all this fat and people are throwing this away. And if it's that soft, could you teach me how to render it? Because I would like to play with it. And so grandma had taught me how to render oil, his grandma, and then I started using it for different things. Because wow, was my skin ever soft? And I was like, this is incredible. Everybody should know about this. But the more and more we realized, we tried it for eczema. I tried everything for my daughter had eczema on her eyelids, her elbows, and her knees. And we tried absolutely everything. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I've got ostrich oil. Why don't we just try it? It went away. And I was like, that's crazy. It came back 6 months later. We did it again. It went away and she never had it again. And I was like, this is incredible. There's no cure for eczema. So then I started realizing there's healing attributes to this oil. And it would make sense. These ostrich heal so fast. So again, I felt like this is just kind of a gift to the world that these animals were giving. And they'd lived on the earth for so many millions of years. So I was like, wow, maybe there was something lost. Well, we started to find out that even in King Tut's tomb, they had an oil and they were trying to figure out what it was. They found out it was ostrich oil. They used ostrich oil for their aches, pains, and beauty needs. Well, who knew? It got lost in time. And a big thing was because the feathers were so valuable. And Dave had even said that he did some research and said the Titanic, the most valuable cargo they had apparently were their crates of feathers, ostrich feathers.
Wow.
Because it was so well sought after for the plumage, for all the fancy hats and different, I guess, dancing apparel and stuff like that. So But somehow the oil got lost in time. And the more we studied it, the more we realized that if you burn yourself and you put ostrich oil on it, it'll take away the pain and heal much faster. And I was like, this is going to be something that we have to really explore and maybe do some skin cares and everything. But regardless, we could talk about that after. But the big thing here was to honor and utilize the bird. So when we talk about pets, we talk about meat birds, we talk about breeders. A meat bird is a bird that has something that is not perfect on that animal. That is a bird that I would always say would have to go to market. That would be a bird that, yes, I would love it just like the same, but I would never name them. I wouldn't maybe be petting them constantly because I wouldn't want to get too attached. If one did get hurt, hate to say this, but they usually went on to be breeders because I just couldn't. I didn't have the heart to put them in a wagon. So one is Spunky. Spunky had a wing that was a little, it just hung lower. He wasn't a perfect bird and he was small. So Spunky would be something that you wouldn't have kept for breeder stock by no means. And if you want to show class your farm and show your beautiful birds, Spunky should have went to market. But Whitney, when Whitney was a little girl, would run up to Spunky and Spunky would kick her, but he was little, so it didn't matter. Well, they got this thing going and she would just go, Spunky, 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 and Spunky'd come running from anywhere. Well, come time for the birds that had to go to market, Whitney said, "You're not putting Spunky in there, are you?" And I said, "No, I promise. Spunky will live." And Spunky had to have been about 15 years old when CFIA showed up here. So very sad. Spunky was a very proud little guy, and he had little hens too. So Spunky was a very good rooster in his day. But the ones that do to go to market, like I said, I would help load them. And that is, as I'm sure with any farmer, is got to be a hard thing to do. I would always say a prayer over the trailer, and I would always say it's for the greater good so everybody else could eat and we could survive. But what I loved about us is that we were new in the industry and we were building an industry, so it was easier to be a breeder farm. So it was easier to keep most of them and only have to put some into market to prove out markets, to prove out what a meat market looked like. So we were selling to Hills Foods in Port Coquitlam on a steady basis. And we were working with a processing plant. And then when people would say, you're only going to get 20, 25 pounds of fat per bird, well, then we had to prove it wrong. And we said, no, we're going to do better. So our very first pilot project that went to the plant, we did 52 pounds of fat per bird. So we were really impressed with how we could utilize everything and now to show that ostrich could be viable. And what we were trying to do is build back up the industry. Because back in the day when the 40,000 a bird dropped, the market dropped right off. Well, everybody was offered to export the birds out of the country. We were offered about 3 times. But that's when we joined forces, the two families, or I should say Dave and our family, joined forces, and we decided to prove out to the industry, to Canada, that ostrich farming was a really good agriculture entity.
And at this point in the 2000s, you had approximately how many birds?
I would say at 2000, we had 250 birds.
About 250.
And then what had happened is when COVID hit, which was just devastating.
We'll get to COVID. But
yeah.
Just during the heat of the business, 250-ish.
No, when CFIA showed up here, we had
before
that we had taken on another 200, a little over 200 birds. So we were around the 450 mark.
And how many were pets, long-term birds versus breeders going out?
When CFIA showed up, they were all breeders. And the reason for that was because we were going into the research section, and we were there for 4.5 years when CFIA showed up. So every single bird on this farm was a breeder, had the potential of a name. It takes years to get names for all of them.
Okay, but we'll back up though. Before that, because we're going to get to the CFIA coming. But let's say in 2010,
2010, 250.
250.
250. I think the most we ever maxed out was 300 birds at that back
And-
then. And I shouldn't
how
say that
many were going
before that, when Dave and I joined forces, on one farm, because when we had moved here, we didn't bring our chicks with us and we left them back on a farm.
That's right, you were in Alberta.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we were in Alberta, so we didn't move the chicks because it just didn't make sense to
Yeah.
try and transport. And at that time, we moved 250 birds over here. And then he had maybe about 50 here, so it was about 300 altogether by the time we moved here. But we moved all the chicks to another farm in Three Hills, and that farm ended up having, I think they were up to 700 chicks with our chicks. So at that point in time, I had counted once there, and there was probably about 1,100 birds in the system. But then there was some nefarious stuff that happened in the industry that was a huge setback also. And that was Dave joining the VCC, which a lot of people ask about. And it was his cousin, Dan Belinsky, who was the head of the VCC.
What's the VCC stand?
Venture Capital Corporation.
Okay.
And they had 13 projects on the go. And Eric and I lived through that of coming here, and it started out with a huge promise of a huge wage. They were going to give us this wonderful life, and we were to run a program here. But we were really fast to find out when we showed up, it was already at the tail end of this VCC survival. But it had to do with a disgruntled shareholder had put into the security commissions an investigation to find out where money went in the VCC and whether they were doing their trading proper. And so when that happened, and I'd heard, because we got quite involved on talking with all the not all the shareholders, but all the main players of the Venture Capital Corporation, because we were here on an ostrich farm, and Dave had vetted in two farms, half of the business he vetted into the venture capital company. And that's in order for him giving them half, they were supposed to come up with $3 million. And if they came up with the $3 million, then they already had 2 barns up the highway. They had all these big, big dreams. And so we kind of bought into that picture too, thinking that this was going to be a huge adventure, and it was just going to help move everything I believed in. So it was easy to get involved and come in, but at the same respects, when the VCC started to go down, I went to every single investor. I got a list and started making calls, and I said, stick with us, whatever you do, stick with us. We will make sure you get your money. Just stick with us. And they all said no. They said, we're really sorry. You came in, that you sound wonderful, and but because 13 projects on the go, a ski hill can wait, a bowling alley can wait, apartment buildings being built can wait. All that can be put on hold. But when you have a farm of animals, that can't wait. And at that point in time, they decided that they were giving away all the ostrich. They were done. That was it. Can't feed them. We were feeding them. We stayed on. We were working for free. We were like, what are we going to do? And they said they were giving them away. And they were giving them away to another gentleman in Alberta that we know had already basically screwed Dave over out of 700 birds that were in Alberta that were left there. So we said, no, we're not going anywhere. And at this point in time, they owed Eric and I a very large, substantial amount of money. And we said, well, with our investment, we're sticking with the industry. We're sticking with these birds. And I said, I love these birds. You're not touching these birds. And they said, sure. So they sat down and they drew up a contract. And they said, in lieu of everything that we were owed, they gave us the whole farm. Not the farm, but all the birds.
Yeah.
And then I talked with Dave, and he said it was really bad timing. He was pretty distraught. And I know if there was anybody that would have come back in, it would have been him. And so we just decided to, as a family, hunker down, and we pulled it together. And every day, Eric went back to work. The kids stayed home. We had some boys that had come for room and board, and everybody pitched in together, and we made sure the birds were fed every day.